How's everyone doing this afternoon? We're going to go ahead and get started today. Hope everyone's had a good summer and a good day. And maybe no one's too mad at me for calling a meeting today. But this is the Public Safety Homeland Security Committee. And Alan, you ready? My good friend, Representative Alan Powell, are you ready? I thought you was going to come up here and give the presentation. That's when we're such good friends. But
first off, I want to thank the chairman of the committee and those members of this committee for taking time out of your afternoon to be here. This is, of course, a preliminary on a pending piece of legislation, and hopefully I can get your involvement into perfecting this. And there's a few other folks I want to start out first by thanking. I want to thank the governor of this state. You know, we've gone through many years, and I'll give you a little of the history, but we've gone through 20 plus years of getting tough on crime. And quite frankly, there's nothing wrong with getting tough on crime, but we haven't been being smart on crime. You know, with all of the things that we did and we passed about mandatory sentencing and things like that, at some point we lost and forgot what it was all about. And at the end of the day, it's all about what we can afford to do and whether the dollars that are spent are actually producing good results. And a lot of that, we have created a situation of mounting recidivism. And these are things that I've got concerned about and have had concerns, as has a lot of members, both past and present, the General Assembly. But I do want to thank this governor, because for the first time in my tour of duty in the Georgia House of Representatives, I've seen a governor who was willing to step up and to say, we need to do criminal justice reform. Now, this criminal justice reform is in my bailiwick as far as being active on the council, but parts of this are that I think that would enhance what they're trying to do. As that council operates and they move forward, and they've got a lot of work to do in a short period of time to do it on sentencing reform and all the other things that are integral parts of the criminal justice system. There's a part that I have been involved in for probably right close to 20 years. Chairman Bearden has also been involved, and a lot of the members who have served on the appropriations subcommittee on public safety. I want to talk about this bill a little bit. I'm going to give a little bit of background to this. What this bill does, and while it is a lengthy bill to the tune of 50 some odd pages, quite frankly, there's only a small part of it that's the guts of the bill, and that's in Section 1. This creates a division of the Department of Probation and Parole Community-Based Services. I've observed over the years that government, and I mean this in no foul way toward state employees, but the bureaucracy of government agencies continue to grow. They absorb, they feed on themselves, they feed on actions of the legislature, those things that we demand or we require these agencies to do. But ultimately, we have developed a lot of problems about the penal system and the supervision. We have a Department of Corrections that incarcerates 60,000 felons or thereabouts. They have a number of programs under their jurisdiction. They have a community-based supervision known as probation. They do all of these things, but quite frankly, it is such a monumental task that what do they do actually perfect or that good? You look at parole. They have a community-based supervision. The only true difference in them is one agency monitors inmates who have been in prison and paroled out, and the other monitors the same felons who got probation. And unfortunately, because of glitches in how the system and a lot of our laws are written, we have inmates who go into prison under what I always refer to as a split sentence, but then whenever they are turned loose into society, then what they are reported or what they're asked to do is, in some cases, they've got to report to both a probation officer and a parole officer. It's sort of like a duplication. There's a lot of other duplications of these services. And what this bill proposes to do is to establish a separate entity, a Department of Community-Based Services for both probation and parole. The legalese involved in this was written by lead counsel. The vast majority of this is only cross-references of existing law to put code sections, whether it be about drug offenders or any of the hundreds of different things. It puts them in sync so they can be handled by one agency. This department, the director would be appointed by the governor. For the purpose of this draft or the purpose of this bill, we basically said monitoring or instructions, since we're affecting both parole and the Department of Corrections, would be that those two boards would basically meet. And that's language that I would hope that this committee at some point could work out something more definitive. What this would do, ladies and gentlemen, quite frankly, it would create a little bit better operation for several different purposes. Not just for community-based services to do away with those duplications, which we certainly have a lot of duplication of services, but it would be fiscally a good issue, because by saving on those duplications, that would quite frankly leave other monies out there, monies that could be more better used if we want to truly do a good job. By the creation of this, we could finally do what the Pew Foundation and a lot of the premier think tanks have talked about for years, and that's reentry services. We need to understand that every person in this state that talks about criminals and the criminal justice system needs to understand that 95 to 98% of every person ever sentenced to prison is going to see daylight at some point. And if we agree with that, then what we need to do is be sure that when these inmates are released, that they're ready to come out. That's the rehabilitation stage. At least we continue to have the high volume of recidivism. That would be handled by, quote, for the first time, a defined in statute reentry services division that would fall under this. Something that has been proven around the country, that if you prepare an inmate before they get out of prison, if you prepare them in the way of work skills, or knowing that they need substance abuse or housing skills, or things as simple that we take for granted as getting them a driver's license prior to, then they might be able to survive in the free world. But most importantly, they need to be prepared to reconnect with their families, because that's the one thing that gives all inmates, all convicted felons, a level of hope. And it is, in my mind, a very serious issue to those of us who are the taxpayers. When we have a Department of Corrections budget that clicks in at over $1 billion, $1 billion, not include the total budget for pardon and paroles, but that's a vast amount of money, especially when you have duplication. And I can tell for those of you who have ever served on the Appropriations Committee, you know how difficult it is to understand a budget that is as vast as the Department of Corrections. That's what the purpose of this is, and that's to create a better system, to make it more accountable to the people of the state through their legislative process, to give it a little bit more direction by the administration and the governor of the state. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the gist of this bill. And I'll be glad to go over parts, and certainly would be glad to answer specific questions as to how and other things, how this would work.
You do have a question, but before we get started on that, I just want to say that this is just a hearing only to get this conversation going. There was not a sign-up sheet, but at the end of Representative Powell's presentation, the questions, if anyone would like to talk on this bill or having comments, just raise your hand and let us know, and we'll get you up. Would you kind of go over Section 1, because I have gone through this bill, and that's going to be the main part of the bill to kind of let the committee know exactly the changes you are referring to in the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 1, basically, this is the language that creates the Department of Probation, Parole, Community-Based Services. For no better terminology, that seemed to be the name to be given. This basically merges the divisions of out of corrections that's currently the probation services, community-based probation services. Also on parole, it merges the parole community-based services into one agency. It would be independent of the other two. Purpose of that was that, quite frankly, my experience, and that of a lot of others, that parole, while they do such a dandy job, that parole needs to have their time to properly evaluate and do those things in preparation of deciding who needs to be out on the streets and at what point. Corrections, on the other hand, by moving this out, corrections would be better served by being the secure housing unit of the state to keep those people incarcerated. And as we all know, there's such a vast amount of expense that goes with incarceration. And that's the genesis of that. In this language, the director of this agency would be appointed by the governor. They would work expressly under his direction and the authority. Board itself, the governing board for basically for guidance and to make issues that need to be made would be the Board of Pardon and Paroles and the Board of Corrections. So they would have a say in direction as to policy and such as that. Compensation would be set by the governor. Reentry services, as I had said previously, the reentry services for the first time would be actually defined into this state as to its mission and goal. Something that those of us who have looked at this over the years, we realize that reentry services, the value that it has, and as far as stemming recidivism, in quite fact pays for itself as opposed to that revolving door of recidivism. And then at that point, the rest of this is mostly what I call the technical language that melds all the different code statutes together to give this authority, to give this department the authority to do what they need to do.
Do you have a question, Chairman Talton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question, I have two questions. Are you talking about getting all this done before the committee that the governor has appointed? He's been appointed some members from the speaker before they come out with their recommendation?
Representative, what we have done, this bill is nothing new. It's been, I've introduced this bill over a series of years in different forms. One attached it to corrections, one attached it to parole. This one happens to be the freestanding, since at this point I think that's the best direction to go. It was put in again this year after several years because of the governor. As the governor had put forth his counsel on reform, then I thought at that time this would be the time that this should be looked at, and if the wisdom of the General Assembly and the administration sees fit, what a tool this would be to work with whatever the recommendations the governor takes from the council and whatever the council recommends. It's one thing to do sentencing reform or any of the other handful of different issues that will have to be dealt with, but this is a hardline issue of reform of a government bureaucratic agency to make something, to make an agency of government work more streamlined, make it more efficient, and make those agencies involved more responsible to the straight line core mission of what they're supposed to do.
Okay, my next question is, since you have probation and parole, so you're creating another entity. So those three departments can be overlapping somewhere, right?
No, the purpose is to stop a lot of the overlap. If parole comes out of corrections, probation services come out of corrections. Corrections' core function is going to be housing. It's going to be the incarceration and carrying out the orders of the court and the incarceration procedure.
So you're changing duties of those other.
You're moving two different divisions out of two different agencies. You're moving community-based service under probation out from corrections. You're moving parole, community-based services out of pardon and paroles, and creating one department specifically where their duties are to do community-based services. The officers, parole officers, they do community-based supervision for parolees. And a parolee is someone who has been in prison and has been deemed ready to be released from prison. A probationer is of something that a judge is a person that a judge has given a probated sentence, but they also require community-based services. So if in the seriousness of it, if that service is the same, one deals with post incarceration, the other with folks who have not been incarcerated but require supervision, then these could be done by the same batch of officers. Now, there was a bill that was put up a couple of years ago by the former administration, and it was defeated on the House because the wisdom of the General Assembly and the House of Representatives at that time was that they did not think that community-based services should be lumped over to corrections, because that agency is so big right now that you cannot hem the numbers up like a hog in a ditch if you try to find out budget numbers as to what is spent to where.
Okay.
That's the vastness of that agency. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just the nature of how government operates.
I haven't read this yet, but I just see a lot of overlapping stuff, and plus with the condition the economy is in now, period. You're going to have a pretty big department. With this department, how many people are you talking about?
Well, I will take odds at your statement, my friend, because you're not talking about new funding. You're talking about budgetarily unplugging those numbers from each of the two agencies and put them together. Overlapping occurs right now. You have one agency doing community-based services and another agent doing it. You'll go to every town wherever there's offices, and you'll see parole officers, you'll see probation officers, all set up on separate budgets. You have a reentry program at both agents. These are the things that we're talking about, and that's creating efficiency and streamlining this operation.
So you're downsizing each department in order to...
You will severely downsize each department. Kendra Mitchell, the budget analyst, has prepared some of the numbers, and at y'all's pleasure, if y'all wish to question her on that. Because I don't expect y'all to take a representative's word about specific numbers, but you can believe this one on the numbers because she is the bean counter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Kendra, a lot more lights lit up when he said we could question you. Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of questions. Will this in any way increase the number of felons that are released? Is this going to change anything?
Felons are released at the authority of the parole board.
Okay, so that will still stay with the board.
This doesn't affect any of the duties of clemency by the parole board.
And my assumption was, and you've just said that the $132 million will actually be coming out of the existing budgets, so it's not new money.
Exactly right.
Okay. I've noticed, and I'm sure there's a distinct difference between the two types of parole officers. One parole officer will handle 200 probationers, whereas the other one ends up 80 to 90 parolees. I'm wondering, why is there so much difference in the caseload, and how is that going to be effective? Will it be basically one department? You might have a parolee or you might have a probationer.
You have currently, the way it operates, parole officers have a different category of felon.
Okay.
They've already been incarcerated. They have notable problems as they're getting out and being readjusted to society. It's their goal to be sure that they are kept on a short leash.
Okay.
To be sure. Probation, on the other hand, since probation is used, quite frankly, by the judiciary in a lot of cases as an alternative to sentencing or incarceration, then there's a lot more of these out here. You've also seen a lot less numbers as far as there's less parole officers and numbers than there are probation. Now, the ideal situation would be cross-training, using the same officers. It's called efficiency in government, and to basically cross-train them so that they all would have the same training and the same duties.
I think that's one thing all of us want is smaller government. The hesitancy comes with the idea of starting a new department within the government, but if the funding can be placed, I think it shines a better light.
I have no doubt that there'll be a fiscal note. It'll have to be attached, and that fiscal note should show that the funding can come from within the existing funding. And you're basically downsizing these two agencies into more efficient agencies to do what their core missions are.
And again, to keep the same level of security for the citizens with these folks.
If not a higher level of security.
Thank you.
And just follow up on that, Representative Powell. As you said, across these counties, you'll have a parole office, probation office. We merge these two into one office, save rent, and also everything else that deals with that issue.
Exactly right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Powell, I have two questions. Can you explain to me why we are at a point now where we have to create another department because of our deficit that we're currently in, and we're taking funding out of departments of corrections and departments of parole who are already overworked as it relates to, they have no control over the crime rate that has increased in the state. And why aren't we trying to fund them properly and give them what they need to do their jobs, instead of creating another department and pulling funds out of their budget to fund this community-based program? That's my first question. The second one is...
May I answer that first?
Yes.
In answer to that question, when you say creating a new department, remember that you're not just plucking a new department out of the air and creating something new that's never been done. You're building this department out of two existing agencies, and you're taking the funding level for that. Hopefully, and what you would probably see and what we're expecting to see would be, with the proper supervision and guidance from this administration, that you would see a more efficient cost savings department. Second part of that question, I agree with you. I've been on the Appropriations Committee, and I know how hard probation officers work. I know how hard correctional officers work, and I certainly know the scandalously low wages that this state pays to corrections officers who man these prisons. But the question is answered your own self. If you don't have the money to do that under these hard times, or the last 3 years budget cycles that we've gone through, then it's time to find a new way of doing things, to think outside the box, to do away with duplication of services, so that you will have money to pay people a living wage that are guarding these inmates. And for once, maybe we will get back on top of doing something the right way.
Thank you. And I'm concerned about, what I'm getting from you is that our other two departments are not doing their jobs efficiently. And my next question is, this community-based department that you are establishing here, how is that going to help the prisoners that, the convicts that have been released in my section? I have Byrd County, and I experienced a really grueling crime last year where one of my couples were brutally murdered. And this is from a inmate that was released and had been in jail 3 or 4 times, got out, actually went over and killed him brutally. And so how is this community-based program going to help him if he's been released 3 or 4 times back out into society, still went out, and he did not get any help as it relates to getting him back on track? So what is this new department going to do any different than the two departments we already have in place?
Answer to both parts of your question. To start with, I'm not saying that the two agencies there are being inefficient in how they operate. What I'm saying is that because of the nature of government growth and bureaucratic growth, that they have not been totally efficient by the system or the way the system was created. That's the first answer. Second answer is, quite frankly, I would think that this might be of a benefit. You've got 5 members of the Board of Pardon and Paroles. By Constitution, they're authorized to decide who gets out of prison before the end of their sentence. And you know, as I look and as we see these parole members and board members and what all they do, they've got so many hands in the fire. One is to look at the files, to investigate these files, to decide at what point somebody gets clemency. The other hand is they're actively involved in the management, even though they have a director over there. They're actively involved in the management of community-based supervision of the parole office. So it would seem to me to be that if you streamline the duties as a rifle shot as to what each agency does, and that may in fact give the parole board members a little bit more time to have more diligence and to look through whatever investigations that are done as to who gets out of prison or not. In the case of the felon who perpetrated the crime, well, I'm not familiar with that crime. It is regrettable. But you know, it's incumbent on us that we have continued for years to lock up people that we're mad at, not just the ones we're afraid of. And my concern is today as it has been for years. I'm not near as afraid of folks that I'm mad at. I want to be sure that we've got bed space and a viable prison system for the folks that I'm afraid of. And if we continue to do things and not think outside the box, then it's just going to continue to grow in that direction.
Well, thank you, and I hope that there are some representatives here from the Department of Parole and Corrections here so that I can get further clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is not a question, but I want to say this to Representative Powell. And you and I have talked about probation over the years and whatnot, and being a former probation officer, I think this is a bill that should have been done a long time ago, because I can tell you from experience that when you do have a split sentence, when probation, the person is in prison, that person gets out, and a lot of times those split sentences get lost in the cracks because there's no communication between probation and parole. And this would streamline and bring everything into focus because everybody will be working together. And right now, we don't have that that we need here in the state of Georgia, everybody working together, because a lot of people do get lost in the cracks. And this would also save money because of office space. In every county, you might have a probation office, but you don't have a parole office. So a lot of times, you don't even know where parole officers are meeting their parolees at, and they might be in dual supervision, might be on probation too, but there's no communication. And this bill would streamline everything, and it would probably be a more efficient agency because everybody would know what's going on. Everybody could sit down to the table together and talk about the criminals that you have on probation and parole, whereas now we don't have that kind of communication. So I want to commend you on this bill, and if there's anything I can do to help you with it, just let me know.
I want to thank you for those positive comments, and you will be recruited. Thank you.
We do have one more question. It's by Representative Horn, but he walked out of the room just a minute ago. I don't know if he's coming back or not. But while we're waiting, Representative Holcomb's got a question he can go with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so I make sure that I understand the process, it looks like the director gets a fair amount of authority. In 42-14-4A, the director can establish units within the department that he or she deems proper and shall designate persons and assistant directors. And then in B, the director shall have the authority to employ as many persons as he or she deems necessary for the administration of the department and for the discharge of the duties of his or her office. And I don't see any qualification there to limit that, but my guess is that it relates back to 42-14-3, where the person shall serve at the pleasure of the governor. And so if the governor thought that this person was expanding too much, then that person could be removed. Is that an accurate reading?
Actually, Representative, you're right on one of them. This falls under the governor's appointee to that directorship. But the other that is not, that's basically you can't write it into law, and it rests with each one of us in this room here today. Voting members of the legislature on the budget. You can't put and create new positions if there's not money appropriated. And as we unplug, according to the way this bill is drafted, as we unplug those agencies, parole, supervision, probation supervision, those people come over into this new agency. They're not just going to be thrown away to the winds, because we have a tremendous amount of valuable resources in the men and women that perform probation services as well as parole services. So they'll be moved over into this agency. In a lot of cases where duplication is eliminated, then those people may wind up in some other position.
Thank you.
All things rest on the shoulders of the state budget.
Representative Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Powell, thanks. Just had a couple of questions. The nuts and bolts, logistics of all this. Corrections then is going to be out of the probation business, correct? I mean, they're going to handle incarcerated people.
Corrections will be basically their mission will be incarceration.
Okay.
Following the orders of the court.
So if there's an inmate with a split sentence, they're going to release them to this new department, and that's going to be it.
What happens in the form of this split sentence, where someone has that's paroled, and also the way the system works is when somebody is when the judge sentences, that order is sent to corrections. Then that inmate goes into the system. They're processed. They go through the process of diagnostics. They're sent to a facility. They stay. That's all the matter of the operations of corrections. They stay in the Department of Corrections until they get an order from the parole board saying that this inmate has been looked at, they've been evaluated properly, and we deem that it's time for him or her to be released. Then they are released. Once released, if there's a bulk of the sentence, whether it be parole or a sentence of probation, then they report to their respective agencies. So in a lot of cases that you'll have an inmate where a judge, say for instance, had given an inmate say a 15-year sentence with 5 to serve, capped off with perpetual probation or a 5-year probationary period. That inmate is released at the order of pardon and paroles. Then that inmate comes out, and they have to report to the parole office. They have to report to the probation office. There's your dual moniker. And it could be so much simpler if it was all under one hand. It could also give the administration as well as the operations of government, it could give them a lot of latitude as far as how to deal with these folks, especially in the reentry services.
Okay, thank you. And that was going to be my next question. Forgive me if I haven't read this yet, but the department, are they going to have the authorization to seek outside help to provide these reentry services? I assume they're going to be able to go to.
Currently, you have both the Department of Corrections and the Board of Pardon and Paroles has a reentry division. You have 2 different reentry divisions. So, quite frankly, it could be consolidated.
Okay. That's all for now.
Well, at this point, I don't see any other questions. But don't go away anywhere. I was going to see if anyone has any questions or making any comments.
I want to thank this committee, and I want to thank y'all for the questions that y'all have asked. I tell people about government. I've watched government grow outside of the boundaries of efficiency in a lot of cases. No way do I mean to criticize or give any insinuation of criticism to any of these state employees. Because quite frankly, we've got a lot of good state employees that are doing the job. if we are organized so they can do their job efficiently. We can't continue to operate the way we're operating. We've got to think outside the box so that we can continue to safeguard the citizens of this state. For say, if parole has more time and resources for that 5-member board to evaluate, and if this system works. But what I'm really interested with the confidence I have in this current administration, this administration that for the first time that I've seen in 20 years, that we've had a governor that stepped to the plate and said, we need to take a look at what we're doing, folks. And you know, quite frankly, that means a lot. And it should mean a lot to everyone. And I would certainly hope that during this interim and during the next session, hopefully with the stars lined up with proponents of reform, I would certainly welcome your input as well as y'all's help in trying to achieve this. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Representative. Again, don't go off too far. Does anyone have any comments they'd like to add to this? That was a great job, Alan. No questions, no comments. Ready to do pass it? Just kidding. I'm kidding. Well, if there's no other questions and no one has any comments, I'd like to tell everyone thank y'all for coming out today. And let me just hit on something Representative Powell said. Those folks that guard these inmates, they do a tremendous job, and it takes a special person to do that. And we're thankful to have them. And yes, they are gravely underpaid, and we need to make sure they know that they're appreciative. But with that being said, the meeting's adjourned, and we'll see y'all tomorrow morning.